The Creative Nonfiction Podcast is sponsored by Goucher College's Master of Fine Arts in Nonfiction. The Goucher MFA is a 2-year, low-residency program. Online classes let you learn from anywhere, while on-campus residencies allow you to hone your craft with accomplished mentors who have Pulitzer Prizes and best-selling books to their names. The program boasts a nationwide network of students, faculty, and alumni, which has published 140 books and counting. You'll get opportunities to meet literary agents and learn the ins and outs of the publishing journey. Visit goucher.edu/nonfiction to start your journey now. Take your writing to the next level and go from hopeful to published in Goucher's MFA program for nonfiction. Well, light it up. If you're anything like me, and one assumes you are, because you find some value in this humble little podcast, you need constant prodding, in a sense. That can either be to get your work done or to get your brain in check. I'm one of those dudes who gets pretty down pretty easily. I know, hard to believe. So, it helps to have guests on who inspire me. Enter David Lee Morgan, at David Lee Morgan on Twitter. David was a longtime sports writer for the Akron Beacon Journal, and most recently, he turned his attention to teaching high school English. A move he doesn't regret in the slightest. For the people who say, if you can't do teach, one of the more insulting things you can say to any artist who teaches or teachers who don't, I give you David, who not only is a brilliant writer, an author of several books and countless awards for his journalism, but by the very nature of his attitude and approach, makes him that rare teacher that inspires with every lesson. Now, to be frank, I haven't been in David's classroom, of course, but in my 90 minutes with him on this show, if that's any indication of what it's like to sit at a desk in his class, well, sign me up and maybe I would have done better on the SAT. Oh, hey, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, remember? The show where I speak to the best writers, filmmakers, podcasters, and producers about the art and craft of telling true stories. Here I try and unpack their personal history and drill down on their routines and habits around getting the work done so you can apply those tools of mastery to your own work. Sounds good? Add to cart. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Spotify, or Stitcher and hit that button. Share this episode with just one friend. We all have one, some of us. Or share it across your social platforms. If you've got the time, please leave an honest review over on Apple Podcasts. All right. So David is the author of 6 books, maybe 7, but I think it's 6, including LeBron James, The Rise of a Star, which was the book on LeBron before he became King James. We talk about garnering trust among sources, telling a story straight, being positive, and using slights or insults as fuel. It happened to David, and he's got a great story about how that happened. I think you're going to love this episode. But first, today's podcast is brought to you by Creative Nonfiction Magazine. For nearly 25 years, Creative Nonfiction has been fuel for nonfiction writers and storytellers, publishing a lively blend of exceptional long and short-form nonfiction narratives and interviews, as well as columns that examine the craft, style, trends, and ethics of writing true stories. In short, creative nonfiction is true stories well told. Well, now it's time for the main event.
Like, I'm looking out my window, leaves are orange, it's raining, it's wet, it's cold, it's perfect. It's perfect Northeast Ohio weather, I'm telling you.
That's great. And it's as we get kind of started here in our limited interactions on Twitter and just a few phone calls and even some of the stuff I've read about you. You seem like such a happy, energetic, positive person, and And I gotta say, in my limited years, 15 or so in sports writing, like that doesn't seem to be the case with sports writers. So,
I totally agree. You know what? First of all, like honestly, I really appreciate that because here's the thing. Like my parents were really laid back. Like my dad was so laid back, just easygoing, and my mom, she was a gospel singer, so she was really strict. But my family was really like kind of like, nothing is, unless it's going to kill you, then don't take anything seriously. Enjoy life. Don't get so caught up in all of that. So that's how I grew up my whole life. But it's funny you say that because as a reporter, that was one of the things that most people remembered about me was the fact that like he was always positive. He always looked for a positive story.
Yeah.
And so that's how I've done everything.
Mm-hmm. And like, where did that come from? You say your mom was pretty strict as a gospel singer. Your dad was laid back. So where did that come from for you? And how did you find value in that too? Just being positive.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Like, I just never, I never, even to this day, I'm 52 and I don't like drama. Yeah. I don't like drama, but I'm a realist. I mean, I'm realistic. I mean, I know that, you have to get serious about certain things because as a writer, I mean, you don't write 6 books and not be serious or not be focused on what you have to do. So if I have to be focused on something, obviously I'm going to get the job done. But outside of that, I just always tried to look at everything as, hey, let's have a good time. Let's not have any drama. So lots of times I would always concede certain things. I would always concede, okay, I'll pick up the tab. Who cares? Okay. All right. Big deal. Let's not fight about this. Let's just move on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's move. So that's how I've been throughout my life. And I know a lot of people always say, my students, this is funny. My students will say, Mr. Morgan, you act like a kid. I'm like, you're damn right. You're damn right. Life is too short. So I'm going to have fun, period, especially on Mondays, first period. The kids are like, they're looking at me with long faces. I'm like, hey, let's go. What's up? Let's go. Let's do this. So that's just how I've always been.
As reporters, sometimes the image is that you have to be kind of a bully and very bullheaded to get what you want. You have to show a big backbone, and if you're nice and positive, sometimes that can be seen as weakness. How did you use it to your strength in your career?
Yeah, that's you hit it on the head because I've seen so many reporters try to bully their way into press, not into press conferences, but during press conferences, to kind of show, hey, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then right off the bat, that interaction with that coach or that player is already tainted right from the start. So that person's not going to trust anything that you're trying to ask, and it's going to affect your story. And so I never try to be fake or anything like that. But if you could, a lot of the stories that I've written that won awards, and I like to share a couple things with you, but a lot of the stories that won awards, it's because the subject felt comfortable enough to tell me things that they probably wouldn't tell other reporters. And they trusted that I wasn't going to exploit that and write a good piece that reflected who they were and their emotions and what they felt, and that trust, being vulnerable. And I mean, think about that. I mean, you're talking about high school, college kids, or even, professional athletes who in that small amount of time that you have to talk to, whether it's after a game, but especially in a feature story where they're being vulnerable. They're saying, okay, I'm going to tell you things that I normally wouldn't tell anybody because I trust that you're going to write this piece in a positive way that's not going to exploit all the things that I've told you. And so that's what I've always tried to do. And it's not something where I've tried to fake them out or be somebody I'm not. It's just, that was part of the reporting. That was part of, and if you're consistent, if that's who you are, then it's easy to do that. And it's easy for people to see, like you saw that. And we've talked, occasionally on the phone, on Twitter, on social media, but you already saw that. So I'm not fabricating that. So I'm able to extract great stories from people because they trust me. They genuinely trust me.
When I was talking to Eli Saslow about this, about trust and talking to people, being with them for a long time to write these very long, beautiful features, he often feels the weight of the responsibility of that trust in a lot of these people that he's writing about. This might be the only time they are ever written about. So in a sense, he kind of has the last word on their story and how their story is read by a big audience. And yeah, is that something you felt too?
Oh, Eli, he hit it on the head. I mean, with high school, now being an African-American former student athlete, okay, I was blessed. My parents went to college, and so I was blessed to understand you got to do things right, but for a lot of the kids that I covered, that story that I write or wrote will probably be the only thing that was ever written positive about them in their lives. And especially for young black kids who played in inner city Akron or Cleveland, who would never get anything written about them in the paper.
Yeah.
So I took that responsibility. I made sure that I didn't take that lightly. And so if there was a great game or something that they did that was positive, because here's the thing, Brendan, and especially here in Northeast Ohio, where sports and high school sports and college sports and not necessarily professional sports, but for those lower levels, you could walk into a neighborhood restaurant, Italian restaurant, Greek restaurant, and if you did a piece on that owner's son or grandson or niece or nephew, it's up on that wall. Tattered, yellow, faded.
Yeah.
It's got spaghetti sauce on the plastic, but it's been there for 15 years and it meant something to that family. And so every time I wrote a high school piece, I made sure that when they woke up that next morning, there was something proud that they could read. That's why lots of times I never wrote who fumbled at the goal line.
Yeah.
I wrote the Tigers fumbled at the goal line.
Yeah. I would do that too. I primarily covered high school sports, and it was like when you come out of college or something, you think, oh yeah, you got to throw in the facts, you got to put the name down, but then you realize these are just kids.
Yeah.
Just say the team fumbled, and then maybe somewhere in the story, if some a very sort of anonymous right guard throws a great block, put his name in.
Good call. Absolutely. Yeah. And they love that. It's just some obscure thing that maybe great block downfield. He's thinking, okay, I got my job done because this is all I'm supposed to do. But then he opens that mom opens the paper and says, Johnny, oh my goodness, look, you're in the paper.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I know. Is that something too? Because you grew up an athlete too, were you able to find, you kind of look at a news story and look for your initials to see if you got mentioned in the story, like before you read the thing?
You know what? No, I honestly no, because I graduated in 1984, so it was different. I mean, like we'd open up the paper, and if our picture was there, that was cool. And then it was just no big deal. I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to sound like I'm so old, but it as we've moved forward into this age of digital and social and, me, it didn't seem like we had that then. So we really didn't care if we were in the paper or not. We just, did we win?
Mm-hmm.
And if we won, that was good. We couldn't wait to go to practice the next day and kind of, build on that, But no, we didn't really. I didn't really think about it back then. But I wanted to mention this too. I want to go back to this. We were talking about the positive things that the positive stories that kids can't wait to read. One of my books, it's called High School Heroes: Stories of Inspiration, Dedication, and Hope. And one day I was, while I was at the Akron Beacon Journal, I thought, I've written all these positive stories that won awards about kids persevering. So one day I was in the office. I said, you know what? Let me go through the archives and find all of the stories that won awards and put those together and make it a book just on those stories. And that's what we did. So we just grabbed all of those stories that won awards and put them together. And it was really a big hit here. And you know, other areas, you know, it wasn't a bestseller across the country, but around Northeast Ohio and people who were in the book, it was a very positive book.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
When you were growing up in Northeast Ohio, what was your childhood like, and how and where did the writer in you sort of originate from out of your childhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. My mom, like I said before, my mom was a gospel singer, and she sang with this group called the Caravans, and they are well known in gospel music. And she plays piano, and she was a soprano. So, and my dad went to Miami of Ohio, very smart. He went to the Army. So I think I had that kind of artistic kind of that talent in me, but I never thought I'd be a writer. As a matter of fact, in college, I was a criminal justice major.
Okay.
And then I changed majors. But I think I got that writing. I think I had that writing ability, but just never knew it. I love sports. My dad played at Miami of Ohio. He played baseball. And then when he went to the Army, he played baseball in the Army. And I played football, basketball, and baseball in high school. And then I played baseball at Youngstown State. I went to Warren G. Harding, so that's where like Paul Warfield went. He's in the NFL Hall of Fame, wide receiver. Maurice Clarett, I don't know if you remember, know that name. Okay, Maurice Clarett. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Mario Manningham, who played for Michigan and then the New York Giants.
Yeah, as a Patriots fan, David Tyree and Mario Manningham are bad names in my brain.
Yep, you know it. Yep, and Corey Stringer. I don't know if you remember him. He died. He played for the Minnesota Vikings.
That's right.
And died of heat stroke.
Yep.
So that area is just a big area for high school sports and everything. So maybe that's where it was. But I never thought I'd be a writer. I tell my students now, I never thought in a million years I'd be an English major and write 6 books. I never in a million years thought that.
Mm. So how did you then get on that path to, and where might have been that first bit of validation for you where you're like, oh, I do have a knack for this, and yeah, maybe I can make a go of this?
This is what happened. This is kind of an interesting story. So when I was at YSU, I was a marginal student. Matter of fact, I was a Prop 48 player, which means I had to sit out my first year at Youngstown State because my grades were so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember, when you're an athlete in college, you can't work. And we were broke. So we would go downtown and give plasma.
Yeah.
But for me, and you'd get that $35, and in the 80s, $35 was a lot of money.
Yeah.
When you lived in a house with 7 people and your rent was like $25 each.
Yeah.
A month. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm loaded. So that became my job, giving plasma. I would go downtown like 3 days a week. And I remember I would come back to class and I'd fall asleep. And this one girl next to me, she said, "Why are you always tired?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know." I'm like, I don't know. I get sleep. And I give plasma 3 days a week. She said, "You jackass. That's why."
That's
so
hilarious.
So I just kind of wandered around. But then what happened was I was on academic probation. So I had to get a job, and I had to leave school for a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was leaving the plasma place downtown, I passed the Youngstown Vindicator newspaper, and people were throwing newspapers onto the orange trucks. It was a afternoon paper. So I said, you know what? I could do that. So I'm like, I'll work there. So I went into personnel. I went into the front desk, and there were 2 ladies sitting there. And I said, I'd like to apply for a job. thinking, throwing newspapers on the truck. And the one lady looked at the other lady. I'll never forget this. They both looked at each other, looked at me and said, "As a writer?" And they started laughing. They started laughing. And at that moment, I realized, wow, they don't know me from Adam.
Right.
And that was the response. So I walked up the hill from downtown, walked back up to campus, and I went to my advisor and I said, "I want to change my major to English." And they said, "David, you can't do that. You're halfway through the quarter." We were on quarters. We're halfway through the quarter. And my counselor, my guidance, my advisor actually laughed a little bit too. And I said, "No, I'm serious." So he said, "Well, if that's the case, then you have to fill out a lot of paper. You have to do this, but you have to finish out this quarter." The rest of that quarter, in my mind, I sat in classes as a criminal justice major, but I was not a criminal justice major. In my mind, I was an English major. I couldn't wait till that quarter was over.
Wow.
And I went to, I never forget, I went to DeBartolo Hall. It's named after the DeBartolo family who owns the 49ers. And that was where the liberal arts college was. And I went to DeBartolo Hall that next quarter and did everything I needed to do to switch majors. It set me back. I had a lot more work to do. But then that's when the grind started. And I became a professional writing and editing major with a minor in journalism.
That's amazing. That moment is so crystallized. Like, those two women laughing at you, and that set you on this path. That's such a you coming from an athletic background too. That's the corkboard material that fires up a team.
Oh yeah.
And that
I'll never forget. I'll never forget it, Brendan. I'll never forget it. And I remember those last 4 or 5 weeks I had to wait. And like I said before, it wasn't that I wasn't smart. I had the capacity to be a 3.5 student, but I was kind of like Will Smith in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air before that.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to charm people and have fun because, like I told you before, that was my personality. I was just a positive, fun, happy-go-lucky kind of guy. And so when it was time for me, when I was challenged, when my intellect was challenged, I said, "You know what? I don't want to shoot a gun. I don't want to be a detective anymore. I don't want to be Mannix.
Yeah.
I don't want to be, the detective shows that I watched in the 70s anymore. I want to be a writer. I want to be Oscar Madison.
Wow. Yeah.
I want to be that guy. I want to chomp on a cigar, and I want to wear my hat backwards, and I want to write something and pull it out of the typewriter and have somebody run it down, and that's what I want to do." And that's how it started. And so I had to sit out like I told you, I had to sit out a semester or a quarter. So that quarter I worked at Cedar Point. It's an amusement park. It's like one of the world's greatest amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio on Lake Erie. I worked there for a summer. And then when I came back to Youngstown State, I was an English major. And the first thing I did was go to the Jam Bar, which is the school newspaper. And I said, "I want to be a sports writer for the Jam Bar."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. And not only that, the newspaper my hometown newspaper, I'm from Warren, Ohio. So Warren is only about maybe 10, 15 minutes from Youngstown. So I went to the Warren Tribune Chronicle and I said, "Hey, I'd like to be a correspondent. I'm a student at YSU. I'm a writer. I work for the school newspaper." And they said, "Hey, you know what? We know you. We remember you as an athlete. Why don't you cover Youngstown State athletics for us as a correspondent?"
I love that like when the fire got lit under you and like you found something that really resonated with your taste, and then it's like you were just off and running at that point. When you started on that path and you started reading more critically and it's probably starting to read other sports writers that inspired you, like who were some of those writers, and maybe what were some stories you were reading or even books you were reading? They're like, "Oh man, like this is the stuff, and if I work hard enough, maybe I can aspire to this."
Well, There was one writer that I I always read, and his name is Terry Pluto, and he was and still is. He works for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, but he was the sports guy in Northeast Ohio, in Ohio. But he was well known across the country because at the time, the Akron Beacon Journal, it's a mid-sized paper. I think when I was there, it was like the circulation was maybe 150,000, maybe 210, 220 on Sunday. So it was big. So I read Terry Pluto, every day. And Akron, Akron was only maybe 45 minutes from Youngstown. So I read Terry Pluto every single day. And he was, he was the voice, and the Akron Beacon Journal, they had won a Pulitzer Prize. So it wasn't like they were a small paper. People knew who the Akron Beacon Journal was, across the country. And so I read him, but I would read a lot of I like Mike Royko, and Mike Lupica. The thing is, my dad was kind of an intellectual guy, so I didn't always read sports. I read op-eds, and I would read politics. I would read George Will because those were syndicated columns. So I would just and they would be in the local paper. So I read everything. But I love sports, so I would always read sports. But Terry Pluto was he was the main guy that I would always read because he was the voice of Ohio sports.
Right. And when you were starting out, too, as getting your feet wet as a young writer, what did you struggle with at the time and then slowly, strengthen and build up to eventually become the writer that you would become as into your mid and late 20s and into your 30s?
Well, it's funny. I look back at some of the things that I wrote then. You may have experienced this, too. I thought I was clever. I thought I had the greatest cliche and the greatest little one-liner. They produce more turnovers than Dolly Madison. Those corny. Let the chips fall where they may. Those, and I thought I invented those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then as you read others, as you read veteran writers, you realize you don't need any of that. You don't need any of that. If you do your homework and you do, you're prepared and you're confident, you'll be able to find those stories. And as I got better, one of the things also, I hustled my butt off. I mean, I was a hustler.
Mm-hmm.
If the school newspaper, at the time, Jim Tressel, he was the head coach at Ohio State.
Yep.
When they won the national championship in 2000 with Maurice Clarett. He was the head coach when we were at Youngstown State. So he was there 15 years, and then he went straight from there to Ohio State. So I covered all of those years he was there. So I hustled. If they were playing the national championship in Statesboro, Georgia, they didn't pay me. But I knew, hey, this is opportunity to cover a national championship.
Mm-hmm.
So I would get a credential, and I would find a way to drive down to Statesboro, Georgia.
Wow.
And at the end of the day, I had a byline in Statesboro, Georgia, covering the Division I AA national championship. And Youngstown State played in 6 and won 4. So as a 22, 23, 24-year-old, I covered 6 national championships.
Wow. Yeah.
Based
solely on your rigor and tenacity to do it, because no one was telling you to do it. You had to do it.
No, right. And because if I didn't go there, obviously they weren't going to send me there because it's a school newspaper. They would just use the Wire, or they would use the Youngstown Vindicator because the Vindicator had their own reporter. But working for the Tribune, they said, hey, you know what? You're a student. If you go down there, yes, we'll use your story. You're a correspondent, because they were just going to use the Wire story.
A big thing that I wrestle with, especially in rewriting drafts of long features is I have a tendency, like you were saying, to be sometimes a little too clever. Try to come up with some snappy one-liner that I think is funny, or things get overwritten. So in my later drafts, I always I go through and be like, okay, turn the volume down, let the story tell the story. And,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And in a video that I saw of you when you were doing some book signings, you right at the top, you were like, it said something to the effect of, you don't need fluff, just tell the story in as straightforward a way as possible.
Yes.
I love that you said that. Like, how did you eventually arrive at that? Because that is a really hard place for a writer, especially a young writer who wants their voice to be king.
Yeah.
How did you settle into that confident pocket of just letting the story do the work?
Yeah, that's great. That I know exactly. What you're talking about. What video that was? I was at a Barnes and Noble book signing, and someone asked, "How did you come up with these stories?" And the thing was, I learned. See, this is what I tried to do. I tried to, because of my experience. I'm 52, and I've done a lot of things in my life. From being a criminal justice major to working in haunted houses to working in amusement parks, just everything. So I realized that ask questions, but let people talk, because what's going to happen is, as they continue to talk and become more comfortable, it's almost like that onion. You're going to peel away those layers, and then finally, you're not going to use any of that. You probably won't even use any of it, but then you're going to get down to that pearl, that nugget, where you say, okay, oh my goodness, that 45 minutes meant nothing, because that's the story right here.
Yeah.
And then you set that up. You kind of introduce it. And I'll give you a perfect example. So there's this one kid, I was covering a high school game, these two rivals, parochial rivals. And this young black kid, and he was a running back, and it was a rivalry game, but it was early in the season, because, most of the times those rivalry games are at the end. So it was a beautiful, sunny fall evening. It was perfect. So maybe third game of the season. So this kid rushes for like 4 or 5 touchdowns, rushes for almost 300 yards, and everybody's excited. They get the bell, or whatever it was. I think it was the bell. And afterwards, so they're all happy, and he's emotional, and all the reporters are around, and they're happy for him. And then he's emotional, and so then the reporters walk away from him. They go try to find the quarterback and other. But I saw something else. I'm like, okay, it's week 3, and he's crying way too much for this just to be a game that he's happy that they won this rivalry game. There's 7 more games left. So I kind of waited until he kind of moved away before he went to talk to his family, but far enough away from the other reporters. And I said, hey, let me ask you a quick question. I said, you're kind of emotional. I mean, like, did this game really mean that much to you? And he said, man, you don't know. He said, man, my grandmother was sick, and she's been in the hospital, and I went to see her Wednesday, and it was right before she died, and she had this necklace on the table, and she gave it to me, and she died the next day. And he said, man, I had her necklace on my chest, and man, every time I carried the ball, I could feel her heart beating against my heart. And man, I ran for her.
Damn, that is amazing.
And that was my story.
Yeah. And you had it. No one else had that too.
And nobody had that story. Nobody had that story. And it goes back to what you were saying. Let them tell the story. Let them find the story that maybe they didn't even know was the story. Because as writers, Brendan, you and I know what the story is. That's the story.
Yeah.
The rivalry. Okay, you could easily write in that story. You could easily write that they won that rivalry game. But his grandmother's heart beating with him helped them win that rivalry game.
And I bet the other writers and reporters just like assumed he was emotional because it was the rivalry game. But like you were able to take a step back and and think and process, be like, nah, there's something more. There's probably something more going on here. Let's ask. Let's get away from the huddle and then just ask one more question, and then you undoubtedly, you have the story with a capital S versus that.
Yeah. Precisely. And that part of that goes back to like your experience, as an athlete, former athlete, and just knowing something, something that's kind of like that intangible something that you could just sense there's something there and if you just ask that question, because you know what, if I would have walked away, I would have had the same story that everybody had, that the Cleveland Plain Dealer had and all the other smaller newspapers. I would have had that same story. John Smith rushes for 4 touchdowns and 250 yards as Akron Hoban defeated Walsh Jesuit, whatever. It would have been the same story.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, That's just being able to look at that and kind of know something else is there.
I caught a video of just a preview video of Bob Woodward, an investigative journalism masterclass thing, and it was
I have that. I haven't. I have all of those, but I haven't.
Oh, cool.
Done anything with it? Yeah.
Yeah, and in that preview video, I remember him like talking about interviewing, and like he when he's interviewing someone, usually a very high person in power, and they're talking, oftentimes he'll press his fingers up against each other to like get him to shut up, and just so there'll be a silence, and oftentimes people will fill that silence in, but you have to be willing to be uncomfortable within that 3 to 5 seconds of nothing happening, and usually they'll fill it in with the meat of the story. Is that something that you've, maybe not like pressing your finger against one another to get you to shut up, but have you learned, when did you learn that maybe the silence is when the story really surfaces?
Yeah, that's a good point, because before I knew what that was all about, you can even see it now when you watch 60 Minutes or anything on like CBS this morning, like on Sunday morning, with Jane Pauley. You'll see the interviewer will stop, and you're uncomfortable. You're like, that person's not going to say anything, and then they keep going.
Yeah,
and you're like, wow, that was a brilliant tactic to use, because you want to be silent and let them speak a little bit more. Even though it's uncomfortable for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, they feel that uncomfortableness as well. So they want to feel that. And I think that's a great point. And I sometimes I wouldn't be silent. I would just let them talk. I wouldn't talk over them, but I would let them, continue until it ran into something else that I needed or wanted.
Yeah.
Because if they kept rambling on like I am, but if they kept rambling on about something, I wouldn't, that wouldn't matter to me. That wouldn't matter, because I know they're going to reel themselves back into what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Sometimes keeping them on the rails is a good thing, but that's a great point. Yeah. Not talking over people. It's oftentimes it's hard for people to do that, because you want to prove yourself to them that you've done your homework and that you're smart, but sometimes you just gotta like sit back and be willing to look stupid in the short term, so you can be sort of, you can write the best story.
Yeah. And you know who does that? I love him. And oh my goodness, there's no way I'm disparaging, but Chris Matthews, sometimes I want him to let some of the guests answer. Yeah. So that, because I want to hear that answer, and then he'll mention something else, and then they answer that question when they were trying to answer the initial question. But I know exactly what you mean.
So often, and I find this in especially in interview podcasts all the time, and I'm guilty of it too. I try not to, because I notice it in myself. But that oftentimes someone will ask a question, but then they backfill that question with like another minute of talking. It'll just be like, what was it like, for you in the middle of the writing process? Because when I start writing a blah, 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 instead of just ending the question and going. You know what I mean? Like, do you catch
Oh,
that?
absolutely. Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. I think I may have done that early in my career.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a way to let the person you're interviewing know that you're kind of on their side, or you're setting it up to say, hey, listen, I want you to answer this question, but I've been there too. So, but I don't know. I mean, looking back, I'm sure I did that a lot. I'm sure I did it later in my career. But sometimes if I'm writing a feature story, I kind of know what I'm looking for. And if I don't, I will, I am looking for that. Let's just talk until I find out, what is different or what is unique. Like, I'll give you another example of a story I did that was in my one book, and just kind of like having one idea of what a story will be, and then it's completely something different. There was a young girl, white girl. I think she was a senior. She was a tennis player, and she had qualified for state. And the high school she went to was kind of like, it's mixed, mostly white, but it was in the nice side of Akron. But they didn't have tennis courts there. So the tennis courts were in the hood. Actually, I mean, they were in the projects, and they were built to kind of introduce tennis to the black community, but nobody played it.
Yeah.
So I go there, and the story was just to be about her qualifying for state. So I pull in this area. It's, cars are on cinder blocks, and the project windows are busted out of a certain. So after I talked to her, and the story was going nowhere, she didn't want to talk. It was horrible. It was a horrible story. So I thought, okay, we had a photographer there. I'm like, this is going to be a horrible story. So the photographer leaves. He kind of gives me a wink, like, hey, this was average. So it's getting dark now. And I'm like, hey, so do you need a ride back to the school or something? And she said, no, I'm going to walk home. I said, where do you live? And she pointed in one of these houses that looked like it was about to fall down if the wind blew. And I said, that's the story. Here, this white girl is in the hood wearing this Nike gear, with $100 racket, and she's in the hood playing tennis. I said, wait a minute, you live right there? And she said, yeah, I live right there. I said, when did you start playing tennis? Well, they used to teach us here. And so that was the whole story, because everybody in the neighborhood already knew she was a tennis player. And they knew she was qualifying for state. So there was these black ladies saying, hey, baby, we hope you make it to state this year. We hope you win it this year. And it was incredible that this white girl was in the hood playing tennis, and everybody in the neighborhood knew who she was. And it was a predominantly black neighborhood.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's another testament to your patience as a reporter and a writer, to kind of not necessarily close off the notebook, but like just taking that extra beat, asking her if she needed a ride home, and all of a sudden it's just like the kid who had the big game after his grandmother died. It was just waiting a little extra that extra minute or 10 minutes, just being patient, because the story will unfold when it wants to. But like, if you had just kind of closed off and said this is an average story and you're gone, you would have missed that again. It's like, just being patient is what I'm getting at. Yeah, that
almost happened too. I mean, the photographer, matter of fact, I called him back and I said, hey, can you come back down? I think this is a great story. And what we did was, instead of taking a picture of her like just the regular, kind of forehand and backhand, we had her stand against the fence with the projects in the background. And it was a great shot. So, yeah, he came back down, and after he took that picture, he said, yeah, this is a way better story. But you just learn, that's just experience, of just knowing that's not good or that's going to be crap, and I don't want that to go tomorrow.
Yeah. And, Oh, yeah. I've read, I can't tell you how many stories I've written, like, ugh, whatever. Hopefully it's good enough, but I don't think it's good.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, are you from the West Coast?
I'm actually from the East Coast. I grew up in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where?
You know where New Bedford and Taunton, Fall River are? Outside Cape Cod.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
no, but I mean, when you say Cape Cod, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so just off Cape is where I grew up, and so about an hour south of Boston.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah. So Red Sox winning the series was a thrill, of course. So.
Yeah. I can't believe several years back when the Indians were up 3-1. I don't know what happened with that.
Oh yeah,
that was bad.
Well, those early 2000s series when Cleveland and Boston played were those were slugfests. You know, Bartolo Colon and Nomar.
Yeah. I covered those. Nomar was the biggest jerk ever.
Really?
Oh, Nomar was bad. We'd go into the clubhouse, right?
Yeah.
And they'd have their spread. They'd be eating, and he'd come in like, look at those idiots over there, because we were, standing kind of around lockers to kind of wait for guys to come over. And there was just always these little shots at the media all the time.
Oh no!
yeah, all the time.
Oh, that sucks. I love Nomar was my guy, like growing up, because I was a shortstop, and so
I don't have anything against him. I mean, he wasn't ever mean or nasty to me. Maybe that was just a bad day for him, but it's just the print media. He didn't really treat them. Now I would say maybe the hometown, like Don, what's this, Shaughnessy,
Bob Ryan.
Shaughnessy, Bob Ryan, and there was another guy, Gordon. I forget Gordon's last. Gordon Edis. Gordon Eads. Yeah, like I knew all those guys because I covered the series, and I always had to cover the Indians opposing clubhouse. So I was always in the Red Sox clubhouse.
Yep. Yeah, it could be just the Boston media is brutal, so it could be that he was just crushed by that.
Maybe, but I don't get you. I don't want your dreams to be because you probably still have that poster of him.
Yeah, seriously, him making those great backhanded plays and then slinging the ball across his body to first base.
He was nasty.
Yeah,
he was good, man. He was a good player. Loved watching him.
Earlier in our conversation, you were talking a lot about trust, and that was something I wrote down in my notebook too. Because trust is such if you're going to be able to engender a certain amount of confidence with the people you're going to be writing about, and this is especially true when LeBron James was coming up, and you saw him and covered him from when he was a freshman with a lot of potential in high school, and you wrote the book on him before he even turned pro, or as he was turning pro. But you were gathering string for that story. Yeah. So, speaking to trust, how did you when the media was really starting to be like, oh, he's going to be the next one? How did you get the trust of him, but also his mother, so you could tell that story and write that book?
Yeah. Well, actually, that trust started before his freshman year, which actually allowed me to be able to write the book because I got to know LeBron about his when they were in sixth grade because they played AAU together. It was LeBron, Willie McGee, who is that? He is now the St. Vincent athletic director. So it was Willie, LeBron, Sheon Cotton, and Drew Joyce, which was the coach's son. So they all played AAU together in sixth grade. So they would travel. They would win in the tri-state area, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and they would always qualify to go down to Orlando. So every time during the summer, they would come back and Coach Drew would say, "Hey, David, can you put this in the paper? We finished seventh or we finished fourth." I was like, "Yeah, Drew, I'll put a blurb in." So their eighth grade year, they made it to the national championship against a team from Southern California, and they lost. But that was their eighth grade year, and they decided they were like, we don't want to split up. We want to go to high school together. So they all decided to go to St. Vincent St. Mary to try to win a national championship again. So I met them. back around sixth grade. So that's kind of slowly how that trust started to build.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so as they transitioned into high school, they won the state championship their freshman year. They won their sophomore year. They lost their junior year. But that's when everything started to come together, because his junior year, LeBron was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And from that moment on, I think it was February, and Grant Wall wrote that story. And from that moment, that day, there were live trucks, like from the Cleveland TV stations and I think other places. And there were grown men lined up outside the school with stacks of Sports Illustrateds. And that's when I realized this is surreal. I've never seen anything like this. And I thought I should chronicle this.
Yeah.
Somebody has to chronicle this. So that's how it started. But I did have to go to, I didn't go to LeBron. I went to his mom, Gloria, and I said, hey, Glo, I'd love to write a book about all of this. And she said, well, let me talk to Bron and let me see. And about 2 weeks later, she said, okay, Bron said, okay, we're going to let you do it. What do you need? And I said, oh my God. I said, Gloria, I need names of your superintendent of places you lived in, apartments, projects. I need aunts, uncles, cousins. So about 2 weeks later, after that, I went to her projects, Spring Hill, and she gave me, and I just pulled up, she came down, and she gave me a notepad, a yellow notepad with like dozens and dozens of names and numbers.
Wow.
And I just started calling people.
That's amazing. What a resource there that she was able to give you, though, because that's what it's about. Is just going through that list, making those calls, checking a story against another. What else do you remember? Who else would know something from this? And just building a picture.
Yeah, that's what it was. And then with that, having all of that kind of personal information from aunts, uncles, like LeBron's uncles, Gloria's brothers, people who coached LeBron, former teachers in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, all of those people, people that he played against, NBA players that I was able to interview, who knew LeBron and saw him play. I was able to get all of that. And so during his junior and senior year, those were the 2 years where I kind of put the book together, because I was still following him.
Yeah.
I was still covering them. So it gave me that window of 2 years to put it together, because we were going to release it like weeks. It came out like 4 or 5 days before that, the season opener, his rookie season at Sacramento.
When you were working on that book, and of course you're still at the newspaper, how did you set up your days so you could effectively work on the book, but probably also be out covering the games you had to cover?
Oh my goodness, you led right into this. This is incredible. I mean, think about this. That year, LeBron's senior year, I was the beat writer for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Now just hear me out. I was the beat writer for the Cavaliers. The Cavs were so bad that they said, David, we're not going to have you go on the road. Just cover the home games. But you're going to follow St. V and LeBron everywhere they go. So I am covering an NBA team at home, but traveling with St. Vincent St. Mary. I mean, think about that. And that senior year, they played at the Palestra in Philadelphia. They played in Trenton, New Jersey at Sovereign Bank Arena when they played against Oak Hill, and they played against Oak Hill. That was they played against Oak Hill, and was it Carmelo? I can't remember if it was that year. They played his senior year. They played at the Greensboro Coliseum, and they played the team that they lost to in 8th grade in Orlando. They played against them at Pauley Pavilion. It was Mater Day. the same guys that they lost to in 8th grade in Orlando. They played them at UCLA. And I remember they had the press conference. It was called the Pangas. It was a basketball tournament. There were like 10 teams, but they were the featured team on ESPN2. And I remember they had the press conference at Lowry Steakhouse in Beverly Hills. I think it's where they have the Big Ten press conference or something like that. But and that's what I did. I covered LeBron, so that's how tough it was, or that's how kind of unique it was that they pulled me off of the Cavs beat on the road to cover LeBron and St. V.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of like what Brian Windhorst ended up doing, basically. He's shadowed LeBron his entire career. I'm sure he's someone you know probably a lot from Cleveland.
Let me tell you, Brian worked at the Beacon. We call him Scoop. I know Brian well. Brian used to be a hencher for us while I was covering. Brian used to answer the phones and just take our scores. So I would call in. I'm like, hey, Scoop, I just sent in my story from so-and-so. He's like, oh, yep, it's here. If we have any questions, we'll call you. That's what Brian did. And then Brian, when he went to Kent State. So when he graduated, then he covered preps for us. And then he covered Kent State because that's where he went. He covered the MAC. And then I'm trying to think if he took over after I didn't want to cover LeBron anymore. And I think Brian took over. I can't remember because after his senior year and he got drafted by the Cavs, I didn't want to cover him anymore. And I think Brian took over. But before Brian, we had Chris Broussard. I don't know if you know Chris Broussard.
Yeah, I know. Okay, definitely. I'm familiar with his work. Yep.
Yeah, from ESPN. So Chris covered the Cavs before I did. And then Chris Thomason covered them, he ended up going to the Denver Post to cover the Denver Nuggets. And then I took over. And I think George Thomas or Brian took over. I can't remember. But, yeah, he was there when we were all there.
It looks like you were, at a certain point, certainly poised to make that leap to the national coverage, whether for ESPN or the big magazines, because you were covering your, big primetime stuff, and especially the LeBron experience and Tressel and everything. What part of you did you ever wrestle with that, like trying to go to a bigger market or bigger visibility versus staying in an area that's really close to home?
Yeah, you know what? That's a good question. I did. A lot of people ask me that because I think if I would have pursued it or gave some kind of indication that that's what I wanted to do, I think it could have happened.
Yeah.
And actually, I did have a job offer that I turned down at Newsday while I was covering the Indians that 2000, when they were making that run. But at the time, my family didn't want to move to Queens because Newsday's out in Long Island, and I was going to be covering like high school in Queens, and I was going to be doing some things with Fordham basketball. And so my family didn't want to leave. And I don't know. I mean, that's a great question because everybody asks, "Oh my God, you did all of this. Why didn't you?" And I don't know if I wanted that.
Yeah.
Because I think if I would have just said, "Hey, yeah, this is what I want to do," it probably could have happened. But I was comfortable with what I had accomplished. Covering LeBron, writing books. I love high school. I love college. So I kind of felt like, hey, I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. So I'm going to stay put.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember sort of brushing shoulders with Kate Fagan in upstate New York. That's where she grew up, and she worked for the Post-Star, which is in Glens Falls, New York, and north of Saratoga Springs. And then she went on to Philadelphia Inquirer, and then since to ESPN, has written best-selling books. So, a lot of people, they get on that fast track. They're like, it's that upward scale of promotion. But then some people, they're like, I like my community. I like being folded into it and covering this beat. I don't need to cover, a professional beat. It's actually kind of more nourishing to be able to talk to a high school sophomore who can't make eye contact versus someone who's media coached and insulated with, a PR department behind them.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great point. When you say that sophomore who won't look at you in the eye, and that's part of that trust that that you're able to instill or get them to trust you enough to where now they start looking at you, and then they start telling you a story that other people say, "Wow, you got her or him to say that." But to answer your question about the fast track, you're right. Brian Scoop, we all knew that's what he wanted to do. Chris Broussard, you could just tell these guys were on that track, and I think I was kind of on that track. I covered the Indians in the World Series in '97, and then they made the playoffs in '98, '99, all the way through 2000s. I was in Boston and Baltimore, New York, but I just didn't push it enough, or I didn't push it where others would say, "Man, why didn't you?" I just didn't push it. I was happy. I was content. I was content with being able to do those, but then being able, when that season was over, when the baseball season's over, fall right back into preps.
Yeah, it kind of goes to like the question of ambition, and were you any less ambitious just because you didn't want to go to that height? Like, I would say no, but it was, did you wrestle with that thing? Like, am I ambitious enough if I'm content covering, northeastern Ohio and Akron and the surrounding areas?
Oh, no, not at all. Because if anything, I was probably one of the most ambitious writers there.
Yeah.
Because I was going to find those great stories. I was going to go talk to Derek Jeter. I was going to go talk to, the people who people say stay away from them. So I was very, very ambitious. As a matter of fact, that ambition is what got me where I am, as far as writing books and leaving the journalism field and going back to school and, becoming an English teacher. It was because of that ambition. And so driving across, the turnpike from Youngstown, 6 hours, 7, 8 hours, across the George Washington Bridge to Queens to go to the New York Newsday Minority Job Conference 4 or 5 years in a row, and them telling me, you know what, you're almost there. You just need more experience. And then finally getting a call from Newsday saying, hey, we want to hire you. So that ambition never left. I was just there was a place where I knew I was and had covered everything and didn't need to prove how ambitious I was. It was just keep writing great stories.
Yeah, that's great, lad. It's so hard, I think, for people to become satisfied with where they are. There's this upward mobility, trying to scratch and claw to a higher degree of visibility. Especially, as writers and artists, you want your stuff to be read. You want an audience.
Yeah.
And how did you reach a level of satisfaction with your work and your stance in your region, and not maybe be looking over your shoulder in that sort of competitive and jealous way that writers often and artists do when they look over their shoulder and be like, why are they getting that?
Yeah.
I'm every bit as good.
Yep. Hey, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't look at it sometimes and say, man, you know what, Brian doing all that, I could have done that. I mean, don't get me wrong. You think about that,
right?
But at the same time, that's not really what I wanted to do. Or you know what, God, maybe that's not what he wanted me to do, because he would have pressed me more to hey, jump off of this and go take that job.
Yeah.
But maybe it wasn't what was, what I was intended to do. Because, Chris, Brian, I see so many other people that I had, I either worked with or are friends with who worked at papers, bigger papers, or on TV. And I say, wow, look at that. That's awesome. But no, this is where I was supposed to be, I guess. And it all goes back to, early on when we talked about, I've always been a positive, fun, let's just kumbaya, no drama. Let's enjoy each other's company type of guy. And so if that meant for me to just stay in Northeast Ohio or teach The Great Gatsby in a classroom or teach To Kill a Mockingbird and understand symbolism and understand irony and understand what Atticus is trying to teach Scout. Who would have thought that when I was in Fenway Park?
Yeah.
Who would have thought that when I was at the Bronx, Yankee Stadium? Who would have thought that when I was at the United Center covering the Bulls? Instead, I'm in a high school teaching kids how to write multi-paragraph essays. And they are looking at me like I'm the ninth wonder of the world. And I'm not at all.
How did you make that pivot? What was that moment? You had that one moment 30 years ago when, those women laughed at you and you're like, you know what, screw you guys. I'm going to be a writer and a damn good one. And so similar, not that anyone laughed at you this time, but like, what was a similar moment that crystallized for you that you're like, you know what, I want to pivot and teach young people, the English language and how to read critically and how to write a multi-paragraph essay. Like, what was that moment for you?
You are good. You are amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
Jeez, I mean, what the hell? You're in my brain, Brendan. Look, you call that moment is this. Let me go back first. I mean, you're saying how to read critically. That's so important. That's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to get these kids to read critically. But this is how it happened. So, as I was, after I'd written a few books, as sports writers, during the day, especially at a bigger newspaper, we don't go in. We just cover our beat. So I had a lot of friends from high school and college who were teachers. So they would say, hey, David, could you come in and talk to our kids about English or about writing? So during the day, I would go into schools and just talk about writing. Hey, guys, this is, I'm a writer. Never thought I'd be a writer. You could become a writer. How many of you enjoy to write? So I was doing that. And the more I was doing that, I was doing it every day. I was trying to find friends. Hey, can I come to your school? Can I come to your school? Mm-hmm. And then after I'd kind of done that so many times, I was like, well, talk to some of your other friends, see if I can come to their schools. And then once I started doing that, I said to myself, you know what? I may need to jump out of this journalism thing and become a teacher. And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
That's how it happened. I left the Beacon Journal. I was there 15 years. I left the Beacon Journal in 2010. And I still wrote, and I still write, I'll freelance if anyone wants, depending on, what I want to do. But I went back to school and I had to take a few more classes, did what I had to do, took the Ohio Department of Education, the state test for English and got my teaching license.
That's great. That pivot, did that feel like, I know that here I am starting to ask a question that I'm backfilling it with crap like I said I wouldn't do earlier.
No.
My question is it gets at this idea of sunk cost that you spent 30 years as a journalist and then making this pivot to something that is in fact very satisfying and nourishing for you. Did those years feel that somehow like lack of a better term wasted?
No, not at all. Not at all. You know what? And that's a good question. Not at all, because you know what? The experiences that I've had through my journalism career, you can't even put a price on it when you're in front of students who think that they can't amount to anything, or think that reading is dumb, or think that they won't ever be able to write or graduate or become anything, or have any sense of why am I here? You know, I don't need to be here. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to pass the air test. I can't get this score on the ACT. And for me to be able to show them the movie More Than a Game, the LeBron movie, and then not tell them that I'm in it. And when they see me on the screen, and then they look at my desk and go, what the hell was that? That's Mr. Morgan. He's sitting over here. Wait, he's on the screen. And then then they get inspired. They're like, oh, and then when the movie's over after 2 or 3 days, they're still like, wait a minute. Why are you here?
Yeah.
Why are you here? And then I tell them stories about who I've met, and then I tell them, but you know what? I'm just a dude who was a marginal student in school, but look at where it's taking me. And so right there, you have them, and you have them not only for that 9 months, you have them when they come back next year and they're not even your student, but before the bell rings for first period, they're in your room wanting to watch A Flock of Seagull on MTV because you're teaching them about so many things that they never knew existed. They want to watch Human League. They want to watch the Eurythmics. They want to watch, you know, The Clash. They want to learn more about how to write. They want to learn about journalism. They want to learn about whatever it is. Priceless. It's priceless.
Yeah. What's your favorite book to teach?
You know what? It has to be The Great Gatsby.
I'm so glad you said that. I read that book every year in December. I read it once a year.
Do you?
I do.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love it. I can't get enough of it.
You know why I love it? Because now hear me out. I mean, just follow me here. Because our school is mixed. It's mostly white. It's about maybe 70-30, but we've got a makeup of kids. Some of the black kids who are in low income. But when you read The Great Gatsby, they love the Roaring Twenties. Because I tell them it's kind of like the Hood, but it's not. It's like everybody's flashy. It's kind of like that late 90s when everybody was just partying and having a good time. And, you know, you had Prohibition and you had the flappers and you had all the ladies, you know, dancing. You had all of that. Everything was just flashy. They love it. They love that because you could really relate the 20s to kind of what they are experiencing. You know, the West Egg is like the West Coast, and the East Egg is like the East Coast, you know, so it's fun. And so a lot of the kids, and especially when Myrtle gets run over, you know, they're just like, oh man, that was wrong. You know, they just get so into it.
Yeah.
And so it's fun that's fun to teach them. And it's a book that otherwise they probably wouldn't read. And you could say that for a lot of the works that we teach, that they wouldn't read it if we're not teaching them. And my experiences help deliver it in a way that engages them.
Right. And it's such an approachable book too. The more you unpack it, you realize how deep it is. But it is, you know, it's 187 pages, and it is approachable and readable, and it's short too.
Yeah, it's short. It's only, I think the book I think it's 9 chapters. So we get through it. It starts out slow a little bit. They don't want to read about Nick Arroyo. They don't want to read all that. But then once it gets after chapter 2, they're all about it.
Yeah. And what I love about it too, as a primarily nonfiction writer, and I have to credit my friend Richard Gilbert Ohio native, not native, but he lives in Ohio, and I think teaches at Ohio University. I think.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely.
I think.
Athens.
Yes, out of Athens. He wrote a great blog post. Geez, it must be 10 years ago now, but it's like The Great Gatsby, his memoir. And it's so true. Like Gatsby, I mean, it's a novel, but it is a memoir. It is Nick Carraway from a remove talking about this snippet of time. And it's a other person centric memoir where he's really reflecting on his relationship with this central figure. And it's like when I read Gatsby, I'm like, that's memoir done well, even though it's a novel. But that is like the perfect memoir.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. I mean, I've never had anybody describe it to me that way, but actually, it is exactly that. You know, it's Carraway talking about that guy that he loved, and you know what it was like at that period and all of that. I loved it. Yeah. So that's a great point.
Have you read? I think it's Maureen Corrigan's "And So We Read On" about the impact of Gatsby.
No, I have not. And I'll be honest with you. Until I started teaching, because I love to read, but I'll tell you, I read a certain genre, and I read it all the time. I love nonfiction. I love biographies about comedians.
Right. Oh, cool.
That's all I read. I mean, like Betty White, Tina Fey. I'm trying to think all the ones: Richard Pryor, Tracy Morgan, Jim Gaffigan, Paul Reiser, Mary Tyler Moore. Dean and Jerry. I'm reading now. I'm trying to think what other ones. The D.L. Hughley. Anything. Amy Poehler. Anything that a comedian has. Oh, love it. Like, and Bossy Pants. Because here's the thing. Like I told you, growing up, I had older siblings, so they were out of the house. So I was always by myself. So I watched like the Merv Griffin show, and I watched, Dinah Shore, and I watched, Match Game, and I watched Tattletales, and I watched The Jeffersons and Taxi, and The Odd Couple, and like all of those. And so that's what I love to read. Because that era, that time period, being 52 and growing up in the early 70s and the mid 70s, I wanted the Tonight Show. I mean, back in the 70s and Laugh-In, I watched all of that.
Mm-hmm. I can see, when you were watching those people, those performers, whatever their art was, and whatever feeling that they elicited in you, I can see that like extrapolating out to your writing career. Like, I want to do that with my craft and elicit a similar feeling of entertainment, enlightenment, whatever, and make other people feel as good as those people made me feel.
Okay, you're scaring me, bro. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's bullseye. That's a bullseye. I'm just like looking out the window. I'm like, wow. I'm reflecting on that. Because that's exactly, I'm kind of thinking back now. Man, never had anybody really psychoanalyze that, but I think that's what it is. Like all of those shows, like, Gomer Pyle and Andy Griffith's show and all of those, it's like, that's what, wow. Yeah.
Well, it's how I feel when I first got turned on to XYZ's Byline, or, when I see someone's name, I know I'm in for a certain kind of experience. And John McPhee, Dave Eggers, Toni Morrison, you name it, like these titanic people that I just respect so much. And I see that name before I've even read a word of that new article or whatever. It's just like, already have a feeling like I know I'm in for like David Foster Wallace for his tennis writing, especially. It's just like I know I'm in for this kind of experience, and I was like, if I could, and it's fill in the blank for whatever television or comedian, whatever that is, and you see that name up there in lights, you're like, okay, I'm along the ride for whatever you want. And so much of me was like, a lot of my ego was tied to that, and that like, you know what, maybe I could similarly do something. If someone sees my byline or whatever, like, okay, I know I'm in for this kind of experience. So it's kind of like just wanting to be in the club, so to speak.
Yeah. You know what? That's kind of one of the things that I really was proud of when I worked at the Beacon, and exactly what you were explaining, because I tried to infuse all of those positive energies and positive, all of those things that I used to read and watch on TV and try to infuse those into my writing. People used to always say, loved your writing. When I saw your byline, I knew what type of story was going to be there.
Oh, that's great.
You know what I mean? And now don't get me wrong. When I had to write hard news, or I had to write how the Indians blew a 3-1 lead, obviously you're writing hard news and why that happened. The bullpen collapsed. But when it came to those stories, those feature stories, or those game stories that had some kind of story, like the kid when his grandmother passing, I knew I was going to conjure up all of those things, all those positive things that were inside of me, and that was going to translate into what I wrote. And to add this, one thing you were talking about Toni Morrison, and I remember one year, I think it was 2010. I and I'm not saying this to brag or anything like that, but that year I was one of the top 10 featured authors in the state of Ohio at the Ohioana Book Festival. That's the biggest book festival in Ohio. So, I'm trying to think, there was somebody else who was on that list, but and we were invited to the governor's mansion, Ted Strickland. And you know what? Here's the thing. I always felt, why am I here? There is no way that I should be one of the 10. Nikki Giovanni, she was another one because she was from Ohio. And I'm thinking to myself, there is no way my work is anywhere near as good as this. But you know what it was? I think it's what you had talked about. Because of my positive energy, I didn't care. That was that was who I am, and that's what got me there. The way I wrote, people saw how I felt. They saw what I believed in. And if that's what got me the featured artist, one of the featured writers, then so be it. That's my writing style.
Right.
That's who I am.
Yeah, you had a point of view and in a worldview that, in a way, your stories are shaded through your taste, and that clearly resonated with people for sure.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. So, sometimes, you feel, and you probably feel this way as well, there's no, my writing, you kind of doubt yourself, but that's what we do as writers. As artists, we doubt ourselves all the time. This is crap. This is horrible. What makes you think you're any better than Brian Windhurst or Chris Broussard, or you're not that good, or you would be there, and then you think, you're like, you know what? I am that talented. I am good. It's just, we find different paths. We find our niche. We find where we want to settle. And I mean settle, where we want to end, where we want to drift down and say, okay, this is what I'm intended to do. This is what I'm supposed to do.
How did you, or do you, overcome those feelings of self-doubt in those moments, especially when you're in the middle of a writing project that you feel that might be over your head and you've got that imposter syndrome going on? Like, how have you been able to forge ahead and write something that is, quintessentially something from your point of view.
Yeah, the LeBron book was a project that I thought I was in over my head without a doubt because of just as I was writing it, just looking at the expectations and who LeBron was, and looking, trying to project into the future and say, okay, this could possibly be arguably one of the greatest NBA players, and he hasn't even played a minute. So there was a lot of self-doubt. But you know what I did? I said it goes back to that trust. Trust yourself. LeBron. Nobody knows LeBron outside of his family. No other reporter in the universe. That's how I kept telling myself. Nobody in the world right now, no other reporter knows LeBron as close as you do.
Yeah.
And no one did because the school, Gloria, they weren't letting anybody get close except me. So I looked at it like that. I looked at it like nobody knows all the ins and outs of the practices, what Gloria is like, what LeBron is like, except you right now. Now, eventually people will, because he's going to have to come out of that bubble, which he did when he went to the NBA. But up to that point, nobody really had access in the country except me. Now, other reporters like the Plain Dealer, they were around, but really nobody had like numbers or could roll up to somebody's house who coached him and say, hey, yeah, David, you know what? He stayed with us when Gloria was having some issues, and I could tell you everything about him.
Yeah.
Hey, David, I could tell you, hey, I coached him when he was with the South Rangers and Pee Wee football. And you know what? He was a better football player, and he could have been a better NFL player than he was an NBA player. And everybody to this day still tells me that. And LeBron will tell you he was a better football player than he was a basketball player. You could look that up. You could look it up anywhere. He was a better football. He was all state in football in high school until he broke his wrist. So that's how I overcome that self-doubt. Just, hey, do you trust yourself? Do you have enough material for people to say he is an expert or he really knows the topic of which he's writing? Then if you do, then you just write on.
Yeah. How do you build writing into your day now that it's not your primary vocation?
Yeah, well, what I'm doing right now, I don't look for it because I don't look for a project because it's not going to be real. It's not going to be. I don't want to fabricate anything. Just to write. So right now I'm working on a project with some other filmmakers. We're doing a documentary. We're hoping it'll come out in 2020 on NFL Hall of Famer Marion Motley. And I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was one of the first four to break the color barrier in professional football, and he played for Paul Brown.
Okay, yeah.
He played for Paul Brown, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And one of the things we're doing, I live in Canton. Matter of fact, I could see the Hall of Fame from my window. And we're working on a project to have a statue built for Marion Motley because there's nothing here to show the significance of what he did before Jackie Robinson did that in baseball. Baseball was just the more popular sport. So that's what I'm working on now. And that means a lot to me being an African-American male. And so things like that, being able to join a project like that allows me to continue to write. I'm also working on something. I'm trying to work on a book about my mom's experience as a gospel singer. But those are things, like I said, it goes back to it's personal. It's something I trust. Mm-hmm. So I'm having fun writing these things. Otherwise, I would just be trying to fabricate things that aren't there, and it wouldn't be any good.
Yeah, that's the challenge of it. Like the fact that these projects are fun and engaging you on a level that it's like these are things you actually you have to do them. You're not doing it to meet some sort of arbitrary deadline or it's something that it really is close to your artistic taste, and you're like, I'm doing this because I want to, and it's fun.
Yep, that's it. Because I could say, hey, let's say the University of Akron is right down the street. They play in the Mid-American Conference, so let's say they host Howard University from DC. I could call the Washington Post or a smaller newspaper and say, hey, do you want 6 inches? Or do you want me to write something? You want so many words or whatever. And, I used to do that, or you want a feature story, but I don't need to do that. I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And, hey, you want, the local newspaper here, I think it was a couple years ago when the Cavs made it to the finals, and they had, what's his name, Dellavedova.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, you want me to write a piece how he reminds me of one of LeBron's high school, how they're similar? They said, yeah, right. So they wrote it, and I wrote it, and they posted it, and I'll do things like that. But I mean, really, if it doesn't really hit me, if it's not going to make an impact, I'm not going to try to write anything. It's going to be horrible.
Fantastic. Well, David, we've been talking for nearly 90 minutes. I feel like I could go another 90, but I want to be mindful of your time, and I know the Buckeyes are going to be playing soon.
Yeah, they're on. Hey, let me tell you this, Brendan. A couple things. Do you ever watch Bob's Burgers?
I've caught maybe 5 episodes, but not regularly.
Does anybody ever tell you that you sound like Bob?
No.
Okay, you got to listen. YouTube just Bob's Burgers and just listen to Bob.
Okay.
He's the same guy that does the new Arby's commercials.
Okay.
And your voice. You ever watch Dr. Katz? It used to be on Comedy Central.
No.
Okay. You do me this favor. Just look up Bob's Burgers and just listen to Bob's voice for a minute. You might not recognize it, but I'm telling you, you sound just like him.
All right. I hope that's a good thing.
It absolutely is. It's one of my favorite shows. And here's the last thing I'm going to tell you. Guess where I secured my first full-time writing job?
Oh.
The Youngstown Vindicator.
Okay.
The same newspaper where the ladies laughed at me.
No kidding.
When I graduated from Youngstown State with my degree in professional writing and editing, the Vindicator hired me.
Were they still there?
I looked for them. The very first day I got there and signed everything, I looked for those 2 ladies, and they were not there.
That would have been perfect.
I know. I interned in Raleigh, North Carolina at the News and Observer. I was other place. My very first full-time job was at the Vindicator, that same place where they laughed at me.
Well, yeah. David, thank you so much for jumping on the show and talking shop and your life and approach to the work and everything. I hope maybe we can in a few more months or when a documentary comes out. Or anything, open invitation. I'd love to have you back on, and we'll just keep chipping away at this writing game and little tips and tricks about the craft. It would be just great to keep picking your brain.
Yeah, no problem. You know what? I really appreciate it, Brendan. I'm glad we, got to know each other, just through just through writing, just me throwing stuff out there and you friending me and we've talked on several occasions. I appreciate you having me on your show. I really do. I've looked at, and listened to some of your podcasts. I love what you're doing. I love your Twitter page. It's very informative, and I love some of the things that you posted on there. If you know me, I'm long-winded, so I hope you can cut some of that up so I don't sound like a windbag.
No. I don't think I'm going to cut pretty much anything. You sounded...
that's awesome.
You sounded great.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm kind of on the edge of my chair here the whole time.
Am I right? I am right. You got to be right. How great is David? Can't wait until that documentary he's working on comes out so I can bug him to get him back on the show. Really twist his arm. I think it might take some twisting, right? I don't think so. Thanks to our sponsors and Goucher College's MFA in Nonfiction, as well as Creative Nonfiction Magazine. What else? Oh yeah, be sure to subscribe to the show across whatever platform you tend to subscribe to. And be sure to head over to BrendanO'Mara.com for show notes and to sign up for my monthly newsletter. New one goes out on the 1st of the month. It's an inventory of great reading material I come across over the course of a month. Books, some articles, essays, whatever I can link to, as well as what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. I hope it gives you as much value as it gives me by merely putting it together. I'm at Brendan O'Mara on Twitter and at CNFPod on Twitter. The podcast is at CNFPod Host on Facebook. So connect with me or the show wherever you like. The show is in service of you, so if you have questions of me or my guests, please don't be shy to email or ping me on social. That's going to be it, CNFers. Let the rock and roll take you away if you can't do interview. See ya.